Hello and welcome to Think Fast, where I'm thinking who should pop in today. Is it going to be Elsa and Anna from Frozen? Are they going to be
Oh
joining us today
my
for this
God.
recording?
I
Hi,
cannot
Suchita.
believe I am putting myself through this again. Varun, you and your objects,
Would you
what is
prefer
this like
Dwayne
weird?
Johnson joins us today? The Rock is
Why
here.
do you have a doll of Dwayne Johnson? That is
Because
pretty
Dwayne Johnson gives
weird.
me direction on. He looks at me. I look at him every time I'm sitting on this desk. There's love there. Love
Oh my God. You and inanimate objects. Ladies and gents, we have
always.
hit peak midlife crisis. Peak midlife crisis.
Yes, yes. But how was your week? You went on holiday. You went out of town.
I went on the world's shortest vacation, which lasted all of half a day, technically speaking, because I was working from there. But I went to Srinagar, which is gorgeous. You have to go. Have you been?
Always wanted to go. I've never been.
Dude, it is unbelievably beautiful. I cannot believe from Delhi, it's literally like an hour and a half long flight. And it's just breathtaking. And the people are so nice. And we stayed at this amazing place that I'm going to recommend at the end of our podcast. But yes, I got mountain air, even though it was a day. I think it's one of those things that I don't know how it works with you, but I think it's one of those things where even if I'm working from like a different place, it just makes a world of a
I know.
difference. I'm
So
like
much
super
fun.
happy working from wherever, but just taking that, 2 days to get out of your, same old room, office desk, just makes a world of a difference. You've been stuck in Bombay for
Stuck
a
in Bombay. I'm
change.
considering becoming this person who grows his hair long and goes sits on a beach and learns how to surf. I'm thinking that's what I
Yes,
want to do
with
in
your
my life.
Dwayne Johnson toy.
Yes, he'll come everywhere with me. Dwayne Johnson
Oh
stays
my
right next to
God.
me.
Your wife must be
But
very happy about that.
she loves it. She's happy I don't have like a soft toy of Dwayne Johnson and cuddle with him when I go to bed, which is very
Oh
likely
my
with me.
God.
Very
Oh
likely
my
that might
God. We
happen with
feel
him.
for you, Pooja. But what has happened this week? What happened while I was away?
Gujarat Titans won the IPL. Do you care?
I don't give a shit. No shits
I
to
just want to make
give.
a call out here. I've been watching the IPL since the IPL came out. One of the constant issues I've had with it is just terrible jersey design. It's like someone took logos and dumped them on jerseys and also made combinations of colors which should not be combinations of colors. Like who puts red and silver together? Let's be honest. Like that's like the weirdest combination ever.
Who has red and silver?
Punjab.
Oh God. But
Yes.
Shadi ho rahi hai, bro. Courtney, what's wrong with me? Courtney and Travis got
Courtney.
married. I was
Courtney
going
और
to say
ट्रेविस का शादी हो
Kardashian.
रहा है.
Courtney Kardashian. Yeah, so they got married in Italy, and
Hmm.
obviously Dolce and Gabbana sponsored the whole wedding, which you
Hmm.
could tell because everything from like the parties that they threw, the outfits that they were wearing,
Yeah.
were all D&G. And
Everybody wore that, right?
yes, the whole family were Dolce and Gabbana. I found it a little
Yeah,
tacky.
अच्छा
I
plan.
mean, if you're worth like 100 million to $1 billion net in between all of them individually, why? You know what I mean? It's a little like,
Here's my
ugh,
logic.
like,
If you can get someone to pay
which
for
is,
something, get them to pay for it. Is the logic why they all have so much money?
yes, you don't,
Someone
you
please
don't get rich
some free
without
toilet brushes.
cutting corners.
Will someone give me a toilet
What?
brush for free so I don't have to
Oh
order it on
my
Amazon? I'm
God.
saying.
Jesus, yeah, no, but that wedding was quite a
Yeah.
spectacle. Balenciaga and Adidas have
Yes.
collaborated, and also Balenciaga had this, show that was told on the internet
Hmm.
because it happened at the New York Stock Exchange. What did you think about the show? Interesting, not so interesting?
Look like evil nemesises, mobsters were trying to like rob a bank but walking like models. That is as much as I thought that looked. It looked really funny. I mean, if you could actually make like shadow caricatures of them, you could be in
Yeah.
like a Bugs Bunny cartoon.
Yeah, but I think the one thing that I can like talk endlessly about, but is it's really interesting to see the role that fashion can play in social commentary. And like even if you
Hmm.
look at Balenciaga's last show, so their creative director is this guy called Demna, and if you look at his last show, he actually did it right after Russia invaded Ukraine, and they actually
Hmm.
showed the models like going through the temperature was brought down to almost like make people cognizant of the situation and the
Mhm.
environment physically in which the war was being fought. So I think
Hmm.
it was a really interesting take on like capitalism. It's also kind of ironic because you're having a fashion show which is all about things that you
Yeah.
really don't need but want as a commentary on capitalism in the New York Stock Exchange. But more on that on another day. The one thing that pissed me off online was this New York Times terrible article on
Potty article.
the news. dude, just disgusting, deplorable, and like journalism like this really should be called out. About Glossier CEO Emily Weiss, who stepped down from her role as CEO, but will continue to, focus on, in her words, product marketing, brand, offline
Mm.
experiences, and the likes. What did you make of the original news, though, of like Emily Weiss stepping down?
So, I mean, if you look at the journey of Glossier the last few years, it was something you expected to happen. I mean, she obviously made that huge punt to say, okay, we're going to become Disney and not just a D2C or a beauty business. And at some point, she had to pull that back because it wasn't working,
Not
too
Disney, bro,
expensive, pandemic
Instagram.
hit.
She wanted to become the Instagram of beauty.
Yeah, but she said if you look at someone who we want to, she made a statement, and I don't remember the statement. She said
Okay.
something about emulate the magic of Disney or something like that, if I remember right, is what she said. And at some point when that didn't work, I guess at some point the board investors will want an operator to run it, because at some point businesses do come to a stage where it's just about focusing on the day-to-day, the operations,
Yeah.
everything else. It's not about the innovation. It's not about all that stuff. You've got to kind of keep the wheels turning. And I feel it makes sense. Oftentimes you see founders do kind of move at this point of time to either chairman roles or something like that. And I mean, I've been expecting this, but the article just like put it in such a bad light that it's just a terrible way to showcase.
It was one bad light is one thing, but the second is I actually found it pretty inspiring. I mean, I don't think most people realize that like the role of a CEO is just not fun at all. And it
It's not.
requires a certain type of person, it requires a certain type of mentality, which everyone doesn't necessarily have.
Yeah.
And irrespective of, in fact, like I would be really amazed and very proud of, the fact that she very publicly said that I'm not, this isn't really what my area of focus is. My area of focus is more brand products, so on and so forth. But long story short, like I just think it's so important for founders to have honest conversations about where their skill set lies and where it doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think this article, took what was a very intellectually honest decision, maybe at her end, maybe coerced by her board, God alone knows, and just twist it and turn it, like you said, into something that it had nothing to do with. Like just horrible, like just really ghatia journalism all around.
Yeah.
That also from the New York Times, which is unsurprising. And that also from a female journalist, which I hate saying this, but is also unsurprising. Because I remember 2 years ago when the Away, which is this luggage brand, when their founder had like a big takedown, again, the author was a female. And it was bullshit criticism. But, we can move on to happier things. Vedas has launched a new beer brand. Wow. And you have it in your fridge.
It's called Facket, and I have it in my fridge. It's quite nice. It's a nice fun beer. It's comes in this nice big massive can. So yeah, so good on Veer. It's so on brand for him to launch a beer called Facket, and good on him. And then it's a great collab with the guys from Great State. I think Great State Brewery is the one they collab with on this one. So that's actually been a fun thing this week, especially the video he put out about it. And it's been good vibes around it. It's not like, when you must say, oh, why is he launching a brand? It didn't even feel like he launched a brand. He just had fun with it.
Yeah.
Which feels different from how a lot of other launches have happened in recent past. But that happened. And Forbes 30 under 30, which I can no longer be a part of because I will not even be part of 40 under 40 if that ever comes up it cannot come up. Who's giving it to me in 3 months? Come on, someone. No one?
I'll give you 40 under 40.
Fine.
You'll be the only one on that list. Door obsession. Doll obsession. Yes. Who is a 40 under 40 that's obsessed with inanimate objects? You would win that award. But what do you think about the list, man? And the selection?
At some point of time, I think there are way too many awards. There are way too many of these, not taking away from people who deservedly get it. Do they still
who incidentally has been on every list ever? Oh my
course,
God.
Yeah.
Except the Economic Times one, which is cool. I'll let it pass. But I get what you mean. Everyone's
I've been more on the advertising side of things, but I don't think they hold as much value because there's so many of them now.
Yeah.
That's my thing.
One is that, and also I think over the past couple of years, they've become very opaque about their process. You know what I mean? Like, you don't even know what the process is anymore. Like, I remember 7 odd years ago when I was on the list, it was a little cumbersome. Like, you had to go through, someone had nominated me. I don't know what the hell happened over there, but you know what I mean? Like there was this quote unquote process. So I don't know how much of it's being followed now, but congratulations to whoever made it, man.
Exactly. To everyone who got it, congratulations. The question is not on should we have got it or not. The question is more about what is the scene with these awards. But congrats to everyone who's on that list. A lot of good people on that list. Speaking of good people, Nykaa's revenue's gone up.
Yes, queen.
People are buying a lot of
Makeup, especially you. Oh my God, with that
Yes, I've
glowing
got some
skin,
new
especially
products I've been
the
trying out
forehead.
lately. So.
Yeah, no, but Nykaa's revenue is up. Their profits down by, a little bit, but their revenue is up, which is great. And it's actually grown significantly, I think 20, 30 odd percent, if I'm not mistaken, from the previous quarter. So good on Nykaa, dude. Good on Nykaa.
Yeah. Wow, this has been a really long introduction.
Yeah. We should
So everybody
cut
who's
one
been
story
around, we've
out.
been talking for a while. This is not the episode. This is just the introduction. Lots more coming. We're going to dig into a bunch of stuff. But instead of, for once, talking about everything we're going to talk about, why don't you just come back after the break and we will tell you about the future of some things, some terrible things about other things, and I will get Dwayne Johnson out again. That did not sound right. But come back after the break and you will see what that means. Welcome back to Think Fast, where we're talking about the future of something which Suchita has asked us all to talk about. What are we talking about? I like this new role I play of being this mildly zoned out person. It is only an act, people. I'm very tuned in at most times.
Yeah, actually, that's true. Like you look spaced out, most of the time, but like if I had to ask you a question, you'd be able to answer pretty, seamlessly. But let's get into the first question, guys.
I'm a tuned in space cadet.
Great. Congratulations on self-awareness. That's a 40 under 40 list you'd be on. Self-awareness. Okay. So, ladies and gents, the first story for today is this absolutely excellent article that I have, shared on Instagram and Twitter before, but it's called the title is The Future of Search is Boutique. And I'm sure our producer will add a link in show notes, so go check it out over there. But it's from the A16Z website, which covers a lot of trends. VD, if you had to give us like a synopsis of what the article is about, right? What would you say?
Yeah. The article the interesting part is the biggest problem on the internet is discoverability. And weirdly enough, search engines are supposed to solve that. And whatever you kind of wanted to look for, you will search. But search has been broken for a while because if you go onto Google search and search for something, you don't really get what you're going to look for. You spend more time trying to figure that thing out. And there's been a conversation about curation is the future and everything else over there. But at some point, where do those two kind of collide is where this article kind of comes in. And I found it interesting to kind of look at search from a very different angle of saying, okay, we've been talking about recommendations and curation for a while, but can you put structure around it with search methodology to really make search work, but in a more focused, I wouldn't say niche, but in a more focused manner?
Yeah. I think that's a good summary of the article. And, folks, you must read it, because I think more than anything else, it just kind of opens your mind's eye on, how is Google to date the largest search engine? How has no one disrupted the business of search so far? Not to say that people haven't disrupted it. I think people have disrupted it in their own sort of way. I found this article so interesting because in a lot of ways, it's like a summary of what our OG thesis for starting LBB was, which is there's too much on the internet. It needs to be refined for a certain cohort of people or a certain use case. And I think, without making it about us, obviously, I think the really interesting thing about this article and the part that I liked the most was what sort of business models can emerge. Because the biggest problem with listing platforms, whether they're curated or not, is the business model directly correlates to ad revenue. And what does ad revenue need, especially on the internet? It needs more content. And the second you get into this business of more content to drive more monthly active users, to drive more daily active users, your curation goes down the drain, right? I mean, we've fallen into that trap a couple of years ago, and then it takes a little bit to sort of, get yourself out of it. But I think the thing that I found most interesting about this article was just monetization of curation. And here's where I'll talk about a company which is non-obvious, but, I think aligns with this article extremely well, which is Urban Company. And again, when you read the article, you'll scratch your head saying, okay, why is she referencing Urban Company? I think the problem is when someone tells you that my, problem statement is the future of search is boutique, what is the implication of that? The most obvious answers that people will come up with is, oh, let me verticalize search, like how Yelp did it with, local reviews, or, let me pick a particular category that crushes it on SEO and then build content around that, like Wirecutter in the US has done largely around like electronics and basics. But I think if you really want to get into the business of, curation recommendations, but do it in a way where your business model doesn't hinge only on advertising, I think the way Urban Company has solved it is super interesting, where technically they are a search platform, right? I am searching for a plumber, electrician, a painter, or whatever whatever the hell else. And technically, I am getting curated recommendations because the person who's coming to my house has been vetted by urban company, and hence the monetization over there is like they have two revenue channels. One is B2B, and the second one obviously is commission on sales made through their app. But I think UC is a really interesting way in which they've again taken a vertical. They've gone curation, they haven't gone aggregation. In fact, I think the mistake that they made in their first 3-4 years is they tried to become an aggregation platform, right? Where any Tom, Dick, and Harry plumber could list on UC. But they curated the set, and their monetization again has a really, really, really strong commerce here. So I think that's an example that came to my head, while I was reading this article.
Another thing actually I went in a different direction when I thought about it, is the fact that like one of the platforms which I genuinely love is a platform called Hoodinky. If you I wasn't a watch person till like even a few months ago, although I would like to collect like really old like Casio and stuff like that. Hoodinky got me into watches, but it's a well curated platform, but they've really figured a way to make editorial and search work together really well, where the commerce happens there, insurance for watches happens there. And when I was reading this, I kept thinking of Hoodinky, and like, one second, they've actually figured this out, because I can actually go there, look for a specific kind of watch and dig into stories around that and not feel like I need to go somewhere else to find that stuff. So maybe in the future of editorial could be understanding how you can bring search into how platforms are structured, was where I kind of went when I read it. Because at the end of the day, the problem is that the wider you go, and I think that's one good thing which this says, is that the wider you go with search, the less curated you can make it, the less refined you can make it. You have to go ad, because at that scale you need to do that. And no one's been able to do a scaled subscription platform, although there are a few trying, like Niva and DuckDuckGo are trying this globally. But you can't do scale and subscription is what the larger thought is. But can you do like niche focused, but build certain structure around how search will work in that? Probably yes. Yeah. So I think there's an opportunity there for sure.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of really cool, websites and apps even coming out in the US. So, for example, we spoke about Glossier in the introduction, but Glossier actually started out as maybe not search, but it started out with, beauty recommendations from top beauty bloggers, editors, etc. And then obviously it took insights from that content and then, built out Glossier, right? Another great example over here is in this platform called Super Great. And there's actually a lot happening in the US in the beauty segment. So there's a platform called Super Great. There's another platform called Shop My Shelf or Shop the Shelf. I'm forgetting the exact term. But again, both are beauty focused, both are highly curated. There's another phenomenal, super cool website called theexpert.com, which again curates, the best interior designers. And basically you can book a consultation with literally like the Kelly Wesslers of the world. Maybe Kelly Wessler's not on it, but like the top interior designers in the US. So I think the interesting takeaway for me is everything doesn't have to go back to content, even though Hoodinky is a great example. Everything doesn't have to go back to content. There are great content examples, like Wirecutter apparently drives affiliate revenue of $150 million, which is no loose change, right? NY Mag has this really cool platform called The Strategist, which again, I think does about 20-30 mil in revenue based on last time I was researching their platform. But I think the really cool thing with the future of search and the future of search being boutique is that boutique doesn't have to be tied back to content. It could literally just be thinking about what is the category that I'm problem solving for, and then problem solving for that category in a way that, is best done for that category. Case in point, the urban company example that I gave.
Yeah. I think the other point which I actually liked about this was they also talked about how, because you're talking so much Web3 and NFTs and everything else, and I still strongly believe NFTs are so untested that people are already saying, is this even a legit thing? But that could actually be one of the keys to unlocking this from a long-term value perspective. But I guess time will tell.
Time will tell. And time is
Speaking
telling
of time will
to the next topic. Oh, yes. Shit! We dropped the same line.
Yes. Speaking of time will tell, have you heard of this tale saying "Sher aa raha hai, but sher aata nahi hai"?
No.
Yes. Same way. People have been saying social commerce is the next thing. Social commerce is the next big opportunity. But is social commerce a thing anymore? Or is this something which is still saying is going to be a thing sometime down the line? And because that's an important point to talk about, right? Because we've been talking about almost an alternative to Amazon, Flipkart, etc. in India, right? From Meesho to Bulbul Shop or Bulbul? Bulbul Shop.
Yeah.
Obviously, this has been kind of being built up. But there was even, if I look at it here, this management consultancy called Red Seer said $7 billion opportunity by 2025 in social commerce. But first, I want to ask you, what is social commerce for someone who doesn't trying to figure out what is it?
So, we discussed this, I think it was our second or our third episode. And I remember I did a lot of research on this, but basically, loosely speaking, social commerce is commerce that happens, which is driven by social media. And there have been many like avatars of this, right? There's Meesho who built their social commerce on WhatsApp along with, companies like Dealshare or W Mall. So there are companies like Linktree, for example, which will build tools for creators. And, parts of those tools could be used to drive, commerce. There's another platform that I mentioned in the previous segment called Supergreat, also does some version of that as well. And then the third, type of social commerce is like literally building platforms on which shopping happens, right? So just to reiterate, one is use an existing channel, the second is give creators tools, and the third one is become a competition to Instagram. In China, this competition to Instagram and YouTube has worked. So, for example, in China, you have Xiaohongshu, you have iQIYI, which is their, YouTube equivalent. And there are all these crazy data points about how, creators have driven like millions of dollars of sale, by posting content and, blah, blah, bullshit. I think obviously what is well and apparent is that in the Indian context, the only person who seems to have made a bit of a dent in, quote unquote, social commerce is Meesho, which made a dent when they were focusing on resellers. Now that they've gone B2C, whether they give a shit about resellers or don't, that, only time will tell. But to sort of, get back to the point, those are basically the three definitions, quote unquote, of social commerce. And for better or for worse, the only one who's actually made a dent from a valuation perspective, I don't know what their revenues are, is Meesho.
I was actually seeing this on Twitter, and I don't know how verified it is, that Meesho burns so much money. There was a random number there, and it didn't make sense.
45 million was the number, which sounded absurd.
Exactly right. Which I'm like, how can that be true? If it is, then okay, that's a problem there. But look at the fact that does it make business sense to do it from an Indian context? And maybe we've taken a lot of stuff from China and tried it in India, but I think one of the learnings over the last many years is that you can't take something that works in China and suddenly make it work in India as well. And if you look at even numbers, right? I mean, we just ran through this article, which we can also link up in the, what does it says that the average order value in these categories is which is largely what goes in reseller businesses, is about 250 to 400 rupees. But to make money, the platforms need to get at least 500 to 700 rupee orders.
Actually closer to 1,000. Otherwise, you're still loss making.
Yeah, exactly right. And so at some point, I'm gathering the reason why they're all shifting away and trying different things is it's not making money. And the more the market has moved towards saying, what's your path to profitability, the more you're seeing a lot of these businesses move towards, okay, what model works for us to kind of at least show that in the future. And maybe social commerce isn't showing that.
So, I don't think everything comes down to path to profitability. I think actually, because path to profitability is an outcome, right? What is the input? The input is foundationally and on first principles, something that you're doing needs to tie in with a customer need, right? So for example, if you just had to cherry pick on Meesho for a second, why did reseller work? It worked because the problem statement was actually at the reseller's end, which is how do I make supplemental income? Correct. And then, through Meesho's whatever business model, irrespective of to what extent it is or hasn't been successful, only time will tell. But that was a job to be done there, right? I think the problem with a lot of these other folks who've attempted building social commerce platforms. So, for example, if you take the likes of SimSim, Bulbul, I remember when SimSim and Bulbul had raised money, there were at least 20 other Me Toos that had propped up. And SimSim and Bulbul sort of pitch to consumers was that we are doing live commerce. Now, the question, and I think, their earlier sort of like problem statement that they identified was that Indian e-commerce to date has targeted only tier 1 and tier 2, for the most part, users. And through live commerce, we'll be able to, actually show what the product looks and feels like. And by showing what the product looks and feels like, we'll be able to build trust. And because we build trust, people will convert better than they do on traditional e-com platforms. I think the thing that, and I mean, I can't speak on any of their behalf, but I think the big realization that came at the end of all of this is, no one who has tried to build a Instagram, Naptol or ABC XYZ clone, none of them have actually been able to articulate what is the job to be done, right? And hence, over time, they've all become like Sasta Tikao sellers. So, what will sell on remember we guys were going through Meesho and we found a Rolex for like
Yeah.
$300 and all kinds of like absurd things, right? So I think the problem with a lot of these platforms, and it happened to Wish in the US also, where they just, because you're not doing any job for a customer, you end up just pandering to the lowest common denominator, which is sasta tikao, and then how that sort of builds into a revenue stream becomes a, like there's a significant divide in between the two.
Yeah, if you look at it, what is happening to even traditional e-com companies, if you call them that, is they're also figuring a way to put all of this into their platforms itself. I mean, I know that Myntra has for a while tried to bring this almost like Instagram-like
Like
vibe into
commerce.
it with content. They've
Yeah.
done reality shows, all that stuff. And there's Amazon Mini TV, which initially I was confused by, but now I kind of get it. Instead of because initially I was like, why would you put this here if you have Amazon Prime Video? But now it kind of makes sense. It kind of get people into the app itself for multiple reasons and they end up buying something. So maybe India is more a mega app or like an all-in-one app kind of a market rather than, again, is this a niche that is scalable because of the problems that you spoke about? I mean, if you address those problems, will it solve the larger business foundational scenarios is actually the question.
I think, and finally, like it goes back to what we spoke about in the last episode, right? Like, I hate to say this, but it is so difficult to make money out of the top 70, 80 million customers in
Yeah.
India. No one has done this. The only people who've made a dent in this have been like the HULs of the world, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. And I think the biggest problem with a lot of these companies, especially the platform first companies, so I'm not talking about Myntra or Nykaa, for whom it's a feature, it's not a product, right? Like Amazon, God knows how Mini TV is doing, right? Like just because it's there doesn't mean it's driving jack shit for Amazon. But I think the problem is the second these companies start targeting, tier 3, tier 4 plus consumers, it's just like, and not juxtapose unnecessarily, but think of it almost as like quick commerce versus big basket. Right? Like the reason why big basket works is because they go after literally your basket. Unke naam mein likha hai, right? They don't go after individual items. And because they're going after the basket, you're able to drive in more like number of items in an order. So even if the per item ASP is low, your overall basket becomes big enough versus, for example, quick commerce, where I'm literally pissing away money ordering shit worth, $200, $300. So it's not it's apples and oranges in terms of, category, but it's kind of the same thing in between the two.
Speaking of baskets being low and high, our baskets as podcast hosts need to also get higher because podcasting revenue supposedly crosses $1 billion. Was that a great segue or was that a great segue? Dwayne Johnson agrees.
That was a great segue. हमें एक भी पैसा नहीं मिल रहा है इस 1 billion से, unfortunately.
Dwayne Johnson agrees.
Mr. Amit Doshi, sir, reminder, sir. No, but thanks for the segue and also thanks for nudging me a little bit to get out of the social commerce story into the podcasting revenue story. But guys, as Varun said, podcasting revenue in the US has crossed $1 billion, closer to 1.4 billion, and it's forecasted to surpass 2 billion by the end of this year and more than 4 billion by 2024. What's interesting is, and for those of you who listen to any American podcast, everything from D2C retailers to financial services brands to obviously ZipRecruiter advertise heavily on, a podcast. But I think what was really interesting about this article and this, piece of news was the highest share of revenue to date comes from host-read ads.
Yeah.
Though it is coming down, so it's down to 55% from 66%. But, having the host validate the advertiser seems to be going a long way. What do you make of this? And what do you make of none of this money coming to us?
So the US is obviously an evolved market in the podcast space, right? And I feel that what's happening now, and it's interestingly, I was on a panel, and I don't do as many panels lately, but I was on a panel recently on audio and brands and stuff like that. And one of the key things that came out of that, because there were people from platforms, from people who are doing sales with brands, everything else, and the overarching sentiment was that we're still in teaching mode, right? We're still educating brands on how this is good for them, how they should kind of invest into this. And in many ways, I feel we're at this weird juncture. I think India ends up always being in this weird juncture where we jump to where the US is without actually going through the process where they actually go through. Because most creators today are looking at ways to monetize outside of advertising. They're like, okay, it's too much work to kind of get ads into my podcast. Let me just figure ways to kind of use this to leverage it to to make money. Otherwise, I could do a workshop, I could do a course, I could build a product, I could just kind of amplify myself as a professional. And the more that's happening as well, you're having brands reach out to shows, etc. But unlike the US, where I feel because of the strong talk radio system, which was there for a long time, it naturally came in. And in India, we still don't have programmatic advertising, right? And programmatic historically doesn't make a lot of money, but it's good to have because it just makes money in the background. Because literally episodes from like 1 year ago, 2 years ago, if somebody listens to it, will still make you money because the ad will play in that. But I feel the more and more you're looking at this, we might evolve as a market to podcasts making money beyond ads faster than we might take to actually educate brands as to why they need to advertise in podcasts themselves. And I feel might be a smarter way to kind of go, especially as podcast creators, because brands look at metrics and brands will compare it to video and they will look at, okay, does it make sense for me to invest into podcasts or invest into a video? And at some point, unless you're doing both, which all podcasters are doing now, you're doing video, you're doing social, you're doing audio, and that overall mix is what you sell into a brand, I don't know if they'll just buy audio anymore.
Yeah. So if I had to ask you, right, like if you had to pitch why a brand should invest in podcasting, what would the key reasons be?
Podcasting allows you, if you're picking the right podcast, to tap into a very specific niche and a very specific niche with an engaged consumer. I feel that's the difference between a podcast audience versus what you would get on video, YouTube, etc. Because YouTube is still very generic, no matter how specific you're going with the content. But if you're listening to, let's say, a finance podcast, right, which means you are listening to it with a certain purpose and level of depth. You listen to like a show like what we're doing, you listen to it because you want to understand what's happening in the business space. So you want to tap into that consumer, which historically was always perceived to be high wallet consumer, which is not true at all. The more I've kind of dug into the audience and kind of interact with them, a lot of young people listening to podcasts. But more than anything else, the young audience wants authenticity. And I think that's what you can tap into. But if I tell a brand, why should you invest in it? If you have a specific niche you're going after and you want to kind of build brand relevance with them, you need to advertise in podcasts. Will it convert coupon codes that someone will use in purchase on your site? Maybe not.
Probably not.
I haven't seen that work as much in India as it does in the States. But brand relevance, the specific audience set.
But I mean, don't you think the strategy that's being deployed by a lot of the brands who are investing in podcasts is the same way you invest in influencers, right? You go after, you spend on a bunch of them. So like a Zip Recruiter will never be exclusive to one podcast. They'll spend on like 20 podcasts at the same point in time. So your captive audience, technically is sort of like growing and to the point that you made of having a more multimedia strategy. It seems like most podcasts are now, like even the Joe Rogan show, for example, I know it's exclusive to Spotify, but they drop these clips on his YouTube channel, for example.
Yeah, even if you look at like someone like a Ranveer, right, his podcast is largely on YouTube. It started off as a YouTube podcast, and obviously the audio kind of came along. Even when he has done his deal with Spotify, his video podcast is not part of the deal. That kind of comes out, I think it comes 2 days after the audio podcast comes out on Spotify, if I remember right. So even the deals have evolved because you want to kind of keep the social media / YouTube reach of a lot of these creators. Also, why most YouTubers seem to have their own podcasts in that sense, because it gives them the ability to create long form content. So while the numbers have grown, where the market seems to honestly be going is either you're going after, okay, I want to get acquired by one of the platforms, which the platforms are acquiring a lot of shows, or you're kind of figuring other ways to make revenue. But I feel the problem is really on the brand side. By the time brands figure it out, will the podcasters need the brand anymore is my question. And maybe a lot of them might not.
Interesting. And I think especially, with like all the moves that Spotify is making, which we've discussed in the past, right? Spotify is also going into video. Spotify's made a bunch of acquisitions. YouTube is also doubling down on podcast. Remember, I think we discussed this like a couple of weeks ago on, more like podcasty type, content. So you're seeing you're totally right. I think, in between YouTube versus Spotify, you're seeing the lines of audio versus video getting blurred, especially in the podcasting context. Though, of course, what's left to be proven is what percentage of it's never going to become as big as radio did back in the day. Or maybe it does, who knows? But definitely nowhere close that right now.
An interesting player in this is LinkedIn, which is building its own podcast network.
What?
Yeah. So, and they announced it a while back. So they basically start to work
Okay.
with a lot of shows in the LinkedIn audience space and kind of take them
Hmm.
over. And initially, I thought it's just a sponsorship thing, but it's been going around for a while. They've taken a bunch of shows under it. The branding of the shows have gone a lot more LinkedIn colors. It could be a very interesting player in this space because if you look at business podcasts, especially,
Hmm.
and you look at LinkedIn, there is a way to make that work really well for them because they also do editorial, they also do have their own news team, etc.
Yeah.
I think that could be a very interesting thing to follow.
Da 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 da. But until then,
Dwayne agrees.
time to take a break.
Yes, time to take a break and right back with a warning from someone. Khabardar, aa rahe hum. Break ke baad. और इसी के साथ हम वापस आ चुके हैं थिंक फास्ट में। सुचिता जी, क्या चल रहा है आपके साथ? आजकल वार्निंग्स चल रहे हैं इस शो पे।
Oh my God. One to Varun, your Hindi is Wahtaj.
Now people know
Lajawab.
why I don't have a Hindi
Mashallah.
podcast.
Oh my God, makes so much sense. But it's your story, brother. You start. Sequoia is releasing warning letters, this, that, and the other.
Yes. In the trend of winter has come, winter is coming, winter has already surpassed us and made it worse. Sequoia put out a memo. They put out a memo, which is about a 52-slide presentation. They're basically calling the situation right now, which is a combination of obviously financial markets being where they are, inflation, geopolitical conflict. They're calling it a crucible moment of uncertainty and change. They've told founders to not expect a speedy economic bounce back. They're saying that, basically everything is like, okay, you got to be careful, don't make any wrong moves. This is not going to be like a quick correction. Everyone talks about this V correction, U correction business. It's not going to be a V-shaped recovery is what they're saying. But this is what VCs do tend to say when markets are down, don't they?
Yeah, and not to, make this only about Sequoia's very, very, very long presentation, because a lot of other, investors have been sending out like notes and, WhatsApp updates and this, that, and the other.
Twitter is
But
full of that only
notice
right
how,
now.
exactly, but notice how like the people who pump companies up the most, right, are the first ones to ring alarm bells. I mean, this just always happens. I remember when the lockdown happened, it was the same thing, right? As Sequoia had written this note of, coronavirus is a black swan event. And, there were all of these like Nassim Talib, sort of like correlations being made in this, that, and the other. And, 6 months later, people are back to investing, $10 million at a $200 million valuation. So I don't know, man. I think when people, and again, this isn't only about Sequoia because it's not them. Literally, like every Tom, Dick, and Harry has been pushing out these notes. Apart from, interestingly enough, the one who causes the most amount of ruckus, which is, and ruckus not in a bad way, but like in like a, like ruckusy type way, is Tiger Global and SoftBank. The two who, usually pump companies up the most are the ones who, have pin drop silence. They are not sending out any memos, at least publicly. No one is tweeting about anything happening over there. So, an interesting tale overall, man. Just another month in startup land.
Yeah, and but if you look at it, it's not like anything in the deck was stuff which we didn't know. It has been a bad time for startups.
Like it could have been a tweet.
Yeah, anybody who's like, not 52 slides. I'm like, that's like a lot of slides. You said black swan moment. I was going to call it Kala Kabutar, but I realized Kabutar is not swan. What is a swan?
No, I don't know. Jealous me, help a brother out.
What is a swan? Anyway, if you look at it, just the number of people having like lost their jobs, right? What 5,000 employees so far this year across all the startups have lost their jobs. There's obviously the conflict is still going on. There is still a war going on, and we somehow seem to just be progressing and moving along with our lives, how things are moving along. And it hasn't been, I feel the good part with this is it's taken the insanity of last year and just the amount of money that was being thrown around and the valuations and everything else. It puts it into perspective. I'm seeing a lot more conversation happen about, okay, are the only reason startups, are they letting go of people is because of this? And somebody replied, and rightly so, and reaching to the core, which is you, is saying that it's not just because of the fact that their business aren't doing well. It's because people took outlandish salary packages. Expectations were always that you have to go to some insane number. And that's also going to come back and come back to bite a lot of these people, right? And there have been a few stories on that as well, which are doing the rounds. But all in all, I think when there's a correction, you would hope it also brings with it some amount of common sense that only lasts, I feel, till the next non-correction scenario. Oh, 1 second, we have money again, things are fine. Let's go growth. You'll go back to
Yeah.
square one.
Yeah. And I think, there's two things that I want to add over here, right? One is the companies that are usually extremely badly affected by, legitimate things like recession, inflation, this, that, and the other, are usually never the big guys. The guys who, pardon my French, get over the most are actually companies that just ran out of luck, right? I mean, you have to be a different kind of stupid to, obviously there's like the, WeWorks of the world that burn through a shit ton of money. But the point that I'm making is a WeWork would have never gone out of business. So I think where, all of these memos and this winter is coming type rubbish, I think the people who will be impacted by it will not be the ones who are running their business badly. It'll actually be the ones who didn't do a bad job, but they just ran out of luck. And if you look at case in point, time immemorial, historically, the ones who actually create the most amount of havoc in the ecosystem, they are rarely the ones that get totally pummeled by events like this. Like their VCs will cut them a check, right? Their VCs will make sure that they tide over these tough times. So I think the one thing that I want to call out to is the businesses that see a lot of that see shutdowns, that see real extreme level stuff happening, will not be the ones who were all of that outlandish. So that's one point. I think the second point over here is which you alluded to as well. The second something wrong happens, everyone just starts pointing the finger. And this is one thing that I hate about like desis in general, where, the second something doesn't go right, like we'll have someone to blame, right? Like, oh, it's the founder's fault. They run their company badly. Or it's the VC's fault. Like, they're the ones who like offer ABC, XYZ. But the problem is, it's like everyone coming together, everyone from the employee, like you said, commanding 3 to 4x their existing comp for no reason and taking up those offers despite knowing that they'll never be able to back up the package that they're getting, to obviously founders who, at times get easily influenced by economic time headlines and this, that, and the other, to even VCs who, in their defense, it's kind of their business to take crazy risks because, it sounds retarded, but it is the crazier risks that end up reaping the most amount of, rewards. But I don't know. I hope at some level this crazy blame game of aapki galti hai, I hope that, goes away at the end of this.
I also heard an interesting thing the other day. Someone who's in the space, who's in the whole like VC investing that side, and then and what this person told me was the fact that one of the reasons why some of the sectors, like let's say edtech, for example, have really scaled hasn't been because of VC money. It's because there's been a lot of angel investing money that's been going around, being thrown around a lot. A lot of the businesses which have kind of gotten funding last year during that entire period was because angels were giving so much money. If you actually look at a lot of those cap tables, they didn't actually have big VC money there. There's a lot of angels money. And so I think that's also an interesting factor, is that it wasn't even a lot of the big guys in many cases when the inflated valuations or people raising rounds and stuff kind of came up. It became a lot about individuals, because everybody had FOMO about angel investing last year, right? It just became a thing. If you would get like stuff on WhatsApp every single day and everyone's looking at it. So, okay, have you put into this? Have you put into that? It became almost a thing. I haven't seen a deck in a while. And last year I would get like 3 decks a day.
No, but so going back to what you said, dude, I do get that a lot of this angel money also screwed things up because every Tom, Dick and Harry was becoming a startup, right, for a significant point in time last year. But I don't know, man. I think at the end of the day, it goes back to that normal, very normal human tendency of being driven by FOMO, right? And that's never going to go away. So as long as that stays, as long as, greed and envy continue to be a part of the 7 deadly sins, you're going to see cycles like this, come and go.
Yeah. And speaking of cycles that seem to come and go, but never seem to go away, some more co-founders are fighting.
Oh my God.
The Saas Bahu serial that is Indian startups continues. Metaversity ka jhagda is still ongoing, where the former Twitter India head, just like clarity, right? Metaversity was started by the former in Twitter India head, Manish Maheshwari, and Tanay Pratap, who's a former Microsoft senior engineer. They raised a ton of money from a lot of angels and a bunch of others, but they've been in conflict even before the product actually launched. The idea was to kind of bring edtech into the into the metaverse rather. But things have been going sideways. Now stuff is all over Twitter and lots of masala. But the first thoughts on Metaversity mein darar.
Someone is really enjoying their Hindi taglines today.
Yes,
No, but Metaversity and whatever they're called is one thing. I don't know, man. I think, co-founder fights are totally. I think at some level, all of this shit should just be normalized, right? Like, I remember I was reading something, posted by the Udaan co-founders, because obviously, like, the parallel story to this is Udaan had, 3 co-founders, 2 of whom have sort of, stepped out of more like daily management and operations, and they've picked one, sort of CEO to run the reins. And at the other end, you had this, very like public spat in between these, 2 founders. I remember reading something which was, I don't know who it was written by, Mahesh or Tanay, but one of them said that, while building this out, one of the realizations that we reached was maybe this isn't a big opportunity, and there is a chance for us to return our investors' money, which hasn't been used in product building or ABC yet. So I don't know. I think I don't know if the masala or the gossip really came because of media coverage, but I remember reading excerpts posted either by one of the founders or whatever, where it seemed like they were running through things fairly logically in their heads. So God knows what actually went down, but you can jump in on that.
It's interesting you mentioned that tweet, right? He wrote a thread about this. Manish Maheshwari wrote this tweet, and he basically said that we were trying to bring it. The product didn't live up to what we wanted it to be. The other co-founder, Tanay Pratap, hasn't said a word. But on that tweet, there was someone who commented, who was one of the people who did give that angel investment. Right? They raised up to $5 million. And he said that the only problem with the business is that it's being held to ransom by you. The product is fine. The team is great. The only thing that's holding it back is you. So that's when it got interesting. So if till that point, it was still like, okay, maybe it doesn't working. But here it seems more like, and the more you dig into the articles on it, it seems to be a difference of opinion of what business this is. Mahesh Maheshwari seems to be calling this a metaverse startup. And Tanay Pratap and everybody else seems to believe it's an edtech startup, where it just uses metaverse as a medium. So I feel it's almost like at a foundation level, for a company, you got to figure out what you are before, I would say, you even raise money. But they've raised now for 5 million, and not like small names, right? You have like Future Group, Biani's put money, Manipal Group's Mohandas Pai, Kirtika Reddy, who used to be the Facebook India head before, founders across multiple other companies as well. So they've raised money from like really like well-known names. But I think the problem is at a base level, what are you building?
Yeah, but Varun, it takes time to figure these things out. And I think that's where, like, being very quick to jump on, like, how could you raise this? Not to say that you're saying that, but how could you raise this? Yeah, but I don't know, man. I think it takes time to figure, and I don't know. I think that's where the conversation has to evolve to, right? And that's what you hope. So maybe this Mahesh Maheshwari was projecting something on Twitter, but what was happening behind the scenes is very different. But at least what he was projecting on Twitter, which, as we've learned from the Ashni Grover saga, can also become very petty and very, like childish. He positioned it in a fairly mature way, which is, this at the end of the day was risk capital, which was raised by them. The angel investors who invested in his company were not some farmer sitting in like Uttarakhand. It was, Kritika Reddy. I'm sure she'll be fine as one of the partners at SoftBank, and also as the Facebook India head. She'll be fine. And at the end of the day, man, sometimes some things work out, some things don't. I think the casualty of all of this, obviously, unfortunately, always ends up being employees. But I don't know, I think at some place, everyone who signs up to work for a startup, if they don't, then like seriously wake up, dude. They know in their heads that this is a coin toss. The consequence of me working over here could be phenomenal success and phenomenal results. But, things could also not work out, and we may have to shut her down 2 years, 7 years, 20 years down the line. It is what it is. So I don't know. I think somewhere that like maturity, you know what I mean? It needs to be there. And I think that's where, the quote unquote media or whoever else, sensationalizing stuff, which is pretty normal, of, 2 guys getting together, realizing after a point it's not working out. Obviously, when 2 old people realize it's not working out, no one is rational enough to walk away without a fight, right? So maybe kuch drama hua hoga, but seems like they sorted out now.
Speaking of sensational, and how did you raise money? Adam Neuman has raised money for his new star, our favorite person.
Oh my
I'm not our
God.
favorite person. Everybody's favorite person because of what he built and how he crashed and everything else. He's launched a startup called Flow Carbon. It's not piles treatment to sell tokenized carbon credits on the blockchain.
Though that's a great, oh my God, your first good joke in 3 episodes. Now we're talking. It's a great name for a D2C startup. Piles
Yes.
treatment, flow carbon.
This is what happens to us. We talk about Adam Neuman, but you can continue on the story.
So, I mean, there's really nothing to the story, but how like absurd it is that the man who is basically a caricature, along with his wife, who unfortunately also became a caricature, have basically raised $70 million from not some like Chomu, but from none other than Anderson
Anderson
Horowitz.
Horowitz.
And they're also their crypto division, for which, by the way, they raised like some like $487 billion. Anderson Horowitz is going all in on Web3 plus crypto. Also, people who participated include like General Catalyst, which is a really, really, really well known and well respected fund. So, how this man spun a new story, raised this money is
Talent.
like,
He's
yeah.
talented.
And also, I don't know, but like jokes on us, isn't it? Like jokes on us,
Yeah.
that not us isn't literally just you and me, but like on all of us, that we wrote this guy off saying what a cartoon and he destroyed this company. But I mean, that he was able to raise money from, A16Z and folks like General Catalyst goes to show that maybe there was more happening behind the scenes, than we know.
It would have been funny if what he's building was a piles company. So I'm just like letting it be there. That would be a lot more fun than it's just
That
very
is
obvious
true.
he's building blockchain. Everybody's
We
building
would have
blockchain, but
had many more jokes, but
so much more fun.
recommendations, not much more to the story.
Not much more. So I think we'll take a break and come back with recommendations because all the stories are done and.
Varun's made a joke, so might as well take a break.
Yeah. Welcome back to Think Fast, where I'm still basking the glory of a well-made joke. But what are your recommendations for this week?
Oh my God. My only recommendation is, guys, please go to Srinagar. It is just unbelievably beautiful. The people are so nice. And when you speak with a lot of the locals, your heart breaks because like they have gone through so much shit for the past, like lifetime, but especially over the past, 3 to 4 odd years in between the riots that were happening. And then obviously the past 2 years of lockdown, this, that, and the other. But please go to Srinagar. It is beautiful. If you want my itinerary, I'm more than happy to send it to you. And while you're there, I stayed at this gorgeous place called Qayam Gah, which is literally like nestled in the middle of the mountains, and you can see the Dal Lake from there, and it's just like spectacular. But Srinagar is just gorgeous. What
in
is
case you
your
can't go to
recommendation?
Srinagar, just get to a theater near you and watch Top Gun. It is outstanding. Watch it in the biggest screen you can get yourself to watch it. It's such a visual experience without special effects, and that's what makes it so cool. Because if nothing is special effects, they actually shot in those planes, and Tom Cruise is crazy because he can actually like fly all those planes.
He's also still so hot. Oh my God.
ये होता है ना Botox and flow carbon.
Oh my God. Treat those piles, ladies and gents. Treat those piles. By the way, let's give a shout out. Let's give a shout out to our amazing listeners, Abhinav Agarwal, who bought Monsoon Harvest thanks to our recommendations, and Nikhil Shahane, and so many people. Another gentleman called Anand, who is a co-founder of Leap Club, also listens to Think Fast. But so many amazing listeners, guys. Thank you so much for all the.
We all appreciate you. Dwayne wants to give you a hug. Dwayne is hugging you right now. If you're watching some video, Dwayne is hugging you.
Sick. That t-shirt says "Just bring it." What a perv, Dwayne. Jeez.
What Top Gun?
Okay.
Toodles.
Toodles. Bye, guys.